Spoilers for episode 6, I've reviewed the other 5. There's a link in the description down below to that playlist. Now, I said in my review of episode 5 that I didn't want to give it a number, because if I gave it the number I wanted to, I wouldn't leave any room for it to get worse. And I thought it was going to get worse. I couldn't predict how, but they did not let me down. And now, normally, they just destroy the characters and the magic system and everything else, and we've got more of that here. But they'd actually destroyed all of Book 2. The entire reason for Book 2 existing, the entire motivation for everyone to be in Book 2, no longer exists. Now we're going to have to write an entirely new motivation, just because they didn't like the old one, which would have been men sacrificing themselves to save their friends. You can't have that. No, what you've got in this episode is an eclectic mix of all of the demons of hell. And I don't know why, but the Wheel of Time is just not doing the numbers that everyone expected. I can't work out why, but it's okay. That's the idea of the show. It's not meant to be a success. The success of the show, it doesn't lie in the show. Of course it doesn't. Why would a TV series success lie in a TV show? No, experts say that the success here lies somewhere else. Because in 2018, Rafe said this, and I think it's really bleeding through into the show. Because as you just look at the Aes Sedai, these are women which have just been around other women for quite a few hundred years, and they're just getting so thirsty. It's bleeding through into everything they do. Even erecting their own home, it just becomes a monument to manhood. All I'm saying is maybe the women in the tower would be a little less angry if they sat on that thing. But don't you know that the Wheel of Time is unfair because men are just stronger than women in magic? I mean, I don't know, but maybe magic is just another metaphor for how men are stronger with their muscles than women are in real life. I don't know, maybe he's trying to get some real-world themes into his novels, and life actually isn't fair. I don't know. Maybe I'm just reading too much into the very, very obvious analogy. But I have to give Rafe some credit, because I thought the whole land flashing scene in episode 1 was really just designed to pitch who this series was aimed at. But I got it wrong, because in this episode, Rafe gives back to the lads. That's right, if you like 50-year-old women going at it, then this is the episode for you. In fact, I think if we learned anything this episode, it's that after Tumblr was shut down, Amazon was really the only outlet Rafe had in order to unleash his erotic fanfiction on the world. And it was during watching this I realized that the foul language warning at the start of this episode was really just about the quality of the script. Now, while other episodes have really had this sort of Game of Thrones elements and seeds to it, this entire episode almost seemed designed around it. And I don't think it worked for the same reason I don't think it really worked in Game of Thrones. It was designed to make people think it was really intelligent, when actually, when you get back to it and you look back on the episode, nothing happened. The only real events that happened in the actual episode is that Matt got cured of the dagger, and then they left Tar Valon. That was it. Yes, there was a lot of talking, and admittedly, in this episode, I wasn't bored at all. In fact, I was so busy writing down all the errors, there was no way for me to even keep up with the pace of the episode, let alone anything else. Lots of stuff was happening, as long as you include actually destruction of lore, but apart from that, if you actually want progression in plot, there was nothing. But what we did do is tell you how amazing Egwene and Nynaeve are. Oh, these are amazing, these are great, and they're definitely going to save the world, and the entire world is going to rest on their shoulders, because it's certainly not going to rest on anyone else's. Rand had an entire 3 lines to say in the whole episode. I think Matt had 2, and Perrin didn't say 1 word. That is what I call equality. You want to talk about unfairness, you want to talk about strength in the power. How about giving people some actual work? I don't know if these actors are actually getting paid equal money, but one thing we can be sure of is that the men certainly are not doing equal work. Not only was Rand and Matt shut away in a little inn for the entirety of the last episode, they were in this one as well. I think at this point we should just get Rand and literally chain him to a kitchen oven. At least he could produce some sweet cakes and do something productive with his time. But don't worry, because we start this episode as we mean to go on, with Siuan Sanche as a little girl. She's just growing up as a fisherman's daughter, and she's amazing at everything she does. In fact, she's so amazing, she can completely destroy everything that we know about all of magic in the Wheel of Time. And that means she can just instinctively channel, she can do whatever she wants, because she's amazing. She was born this way. Now, gone are all the ideas of, oh, well, actually, when you channeled on your own without getting trained by the Aes Sedai, you burnt yourself out. Most of them died. And the odd one became a wilder, which was essentially people that learned to channel didn't die immediately. And the only reason they survived is because they put up all these sort of mental and emotional blocks which prevented them from channeling. And so because they only channeled in very, very rare circumstances when these emotional blocks were put through, they didn't get get the opportunity to basically burn themselves out. And so these mental blocks protected them, because then they couldn't channel, which meant they weren't going to burn themselves out, and then obviously when you're cut off from the source, the obvious consequences. But don't worry, Swan was born around that. She can dodge all of those pesky magic rules that actually make a world actually make any sense. She doesn't have to obey them because she's just a girl, and that means she can do anything she puts her mind to. She can even help her father, who's got no arm for some reason. I don't know why, it's not really explained. But I did think during this entire scene, it was nice to actually, in a TV show, have a father figure, which is actually decent. This is a father figure that wants to protect her and feed her, and it's actually very rare to get a good male father figure in a show nowadays. And it is here as well, because their house gets burnt down. The dragon fang is on the wall, and do you know what the father does? That's right, he immediately sends it to Tar Valon on her own. Yes, this is a journey of thousands of miles, and he's not even gonna go with her. He just sends her off with no food, no clothes, no supplies. Just go off on your little boat. I'm gonna stay here and carry on fishing. They won't burn me as long as you're gone. Just go off, little daughter. Travel the world on your own when you're 7 years old. I'm sure you'll be fine. That is a great father figure. That's just the kind of father figure that I would expect someone like Rafe to put into a TV show, especially when we've already seen his tweets. But don't worry, because she's clearly very happy that her father's just letting her travel the world on her own. And the weird thing here is that she's just a fisherman's daughter. Yes, she knows all the fishing waves, and she got a mouth like a sailor, because that's the environment she's been brought up in. But I don't know if you remember episode 1, because Rafe certainly doesn't, when Nynaeve said, actually, no, her wisdom got turned away from the White Tower because, I don't know, she wasn't aristocracy or something, and obviously the Aes Sedai definitely care about a peasant's accent. I mean, they don't, but apparently they do here, or at least they did, because they don't now, because she talks like a fisherwoman. It's very weird, and it doesn't make sense, but that just fits in with the rest of the show. 6 episodes in, and the wardrobe department have finally read the very first chapter of the book, and they've found out that actually Moiraine is meant to have a blue jewel on her forehead. But this is where we find out that Swan has actually become the Merlin's seat. Now, I don't know why Moiraine is panting like a dog on heat during this scene as she's watching her walk slowly, ever so slowly, so slowly I really wanted to fast forward it up some stairs. I've never seen anyone take so long to walk up 4 stairs, but apparently here we are. And Moiraine, during this entire scene, is supposed to really just have all of her emotions in check. She is an Aes Sedai and shows nothing on the surface, except in this scene, where she just shows everything. Now, I don't know if you like me, but I really do not like this throne, and it's for a very simple reason. I'm not sure if that throne is meant to be made of some sort of marble or stone, which has a natural patterning to it, but to me, it just looks like it's made of metal, and it's very, very rusty. That is probably the dirtiest chair I've ever seen in my life. I know a lot of people have complained that all of the sets aren't very dirty, but that chair is actually definitely made up for it. I've never seen that amount of rust on it. It looks like if she just leant back, it would fall apart. Honestly, get the novices and the apprentices in there and get them scrubbing. And look, I know that according to Adam Roberts, the politics of the show are offensively narrow and essentialist because it involves forcing people to do menial tasks. But seriously, if your chair looks like that, then I don't care how menial the task is, get a scrubbing. Now, Logain gets brought into the chambers by 2 Aes Sedai, and I know it's meant to look like he's being escorted and restrained, but if you just look at how they're holding him, honestly, it looks more like he's pulled 2 ladies and he's taking them to the prom, and this guy is in completely chained, so these women, they're going to be a lot of fun. But as you can tell, just looking at them, he may not have been too lucky or picky in his choices to get there, and that probably explains his expression. And let's be honest, everything I've just said is a lot more entertaining than anything that happens in the rest of this scene. Now, Swan asks Logain, do you know why you're here? And he goes on a bit of a rant. And he's like, do you understand that this wouldn't have been possible before? But everyone outside the tower, they know you're weak. They know you're getting weaker. Before, if someone said, I'm raising an army and I'm going for the White Tower, no one would follow him. But now they are. But none of that really makes sense because that's not what the dragons were for. The pattern needed a dragon, so it increased the amount of dragons there were, and it increased their army sizes because it needed a dragon with an army to fight the Dark One. It was the pattern that did all the work. It had nothing to do with the Aes Sedai or their weakness, and I don't know why a dragon would be saying to an Aes Sedai that, oh yeah, I raised an army to march on you. Like, they're almost irrelevant. The only reason you'd come into contact with them is because they would be trying to shut you down because you're a man that can channel. So I don't really understand why he would be seen as the aggressor against them. It's the other way round. I mean, if anything, Logain should have gone, look, we weren't interested in you in the White Tower and the Aes Sedai. As a dragon, I wanted to get an army together and march on Shaiel Ghul and fight the Dark One. And then Swan would have looked at him and said, what's Shaiel Ghul? He says, where the Dark One is, that's where we're going to have the last battle. She's like, no, Shaiel Ghul doesn't exist. And he'd be like, well, it did in the books. It's like, well, it doesn't here. We've deleted it. Have you not read the script? But we'll get to that. So what he says is meant to enrage Swan, but it obviously doesn't have any effect because I don't know why it would have done. He's literally just goes, oh, you're so weak, and then I killed one of your sisters, and that's meant to enrage Swan or something? It's very blunt and very basic. But obviously, Swan isn't affected in the very least. She's like, look at me. I'm sitting here in one of the most repulsive, disgusting, badly designed dresses that you have ever seen in the entire world. Do you think I'm going to get angry just because someone killed one of my sisters? No. I have to sit in this thing day after day, and if I just doze off and even lean slightly to the left, I poke my own eye out on it. You have not witnessed the horrors that I've got to go through, so I will not bend to you. And she's like, because of that, we are going to keep you alive. You're not going to enrage me. I'm not going to give you the sweet release of death. I'm going to keep you alive and make you do menial tasks and parade you around as an example so that everyone can see what happens to a man who dares to channel. And I'm like, firstly, that's almost word for word what they say in the books that they do to Merlins when they strip them of their stole. So seems to be a bit reused here against a man, but there you are. And I don't know what she means by a man who dares to channel, because this is literally from Swan herself, who literally says that a man cannot stop himself from channeling. Because channeling is basically like breathing or a fish swimming, and neither of those could stop doing either of those things, so there's no way that a man can stop himself from channeling. It's a part of the person. It's too natural for them. You basically can't stop it, and it's not a choice. So the whole dare, I don't know what he's supposed to be daring to do. It's not like he has much choice in the matter. But why would you expect the Merlin seat to know even the basic, most fundamental principles of the One Power? I don't know. I mean, this is the same for men and women, so she has no excuse. But apparently, she's just incredibly ignorant about the most basic parts of law. And Logain's there bragging. He's like, yeah, I took on 9 sisters. And I'm like, that's weird. Because literally, Moiraine said in that episode that Logain wasn't even as powerful as Egwene. And Egwene's like powerful for a sister in the current time, but not really that powerful in the grand scheme of things. So Logain is less powerful than Egwene, and Logain took on 9 sisters, and it took that many to actually shut him down. So how powerful is Egwene? And if Egwene is that powerful, how powerful is Nynaeve? Because I'm pretty sure that would basically put her on par with the creator or self or something. And this is where you don't mess with power levels, because someone is going to write in one way, and then the next writer isn't going to know that, and they're going to look at the actual power level chart, and then things aren't going to make any sense. But the rest of the show hasn't, so I don't know why we'd start here. And then she's like, we're going to keep you caged and humiliate you until you eventually go mad, which doesn't make any sense because the taint is on the source and he's gentle, so he can't touch the source. And if you can't touch the source, then you can't touch the taint, and your taint isn't going to get any worse because that's what drives you mad. Boom. But don't worry, because obviously one of the very unfair things about the Wheel of Time was that the men die quick deaths and the women are enslaved. I don't know. Maybe keeping someone caged and humiliating them until they go insane. Maybe that's not a quick death. So Rafe is just out here. He's correcting wrongs from the books and he's improving them. And then Logain gets dragged out and he's just crying and whining like a little girl about, I just want to be given the sweet release of death. Except not like a little girl, because in this show, obviously, the little girls just magically know how to use the power. In fact, they're almost like the creator themselves. They just know it innately, without any side effects or problems, and without any training at all. So I definitely need a better analogy for this scene. I'm going to say he got dragged out crying like Lan.
I am so sorry to my world. This is not what we want.
And then Swan turns on the sisters and she goes, look, that man deserved a trial before me. He didn't deserve to just be gentle. And I don't know why it makes much difference, because she's literally told him she's going to make him suffer for the rest of his life until he eventually goes mad. All because he did something which is as natural as breathing to him that he can't stop. But apparently now she's got morals when there's no man in the room. And so she deals with Liandrin as you'd expect. The thing is, Liandrin actually comes back and she goes, look, he's the most powerful man I've ever seen. And again, The most powerful man she's ever seen is still weaker than Egwene. Still doesn't make any sense, but here we are. And Swan's like, look, you should shield first, gentle second, and kill last of all. This is basic, don't you remember him? And Leandra's just like, oh, well, didn't you see what he did to the sister? And to be honest, I was a bit surprised at that. I thought she'd just go, it's a man, he got what he deserved. But then Alanna the Green, in the very green dress, speaks up and she starts defending her. And she goes, look, you weren't there, you didn't see it. Leandra basically made the right choice. She had no other choice. We all made the right choice. I'm like, what? That's not how any of that works. You didn't all make a choice. When you link with someone, you literally give up all autonomy. You provide your power to someone else, and then the person leading controls everything, and they should know that. And in fact, they do know that, because later in the scene they mention that, and they mention that actually, no, it's Leandrin's fault, because Leandrin was the one that controlled it all, and she was the one that made the decision. So they know what the problem is, and yet earlier on they contradict itself, and both of those things can't be true. You can't all make the right choice, and also it be Leandrin's fault because she's the one that made the choice and no one else had a choice. Both things can't be true, and you contradict yourself in literally about the span of 15 seconds. But Moiraine is shocked, and typically Moiraine, she knows which ways the wind's blowing, and immediately starts joining him, and she's like, no, actually, no, we were all in danger, and we had to tame him. I do like the idea of taming a man. It's got an interesting ring to it. I've not actually heard it used that way in the books for gentling someone. It implies that actually, no, if a man has comparable power to the woman, then he's just untamed, and he needs to be tamed by removing that power from him. It's a very interesting idea. It certainly is. It's a very, very interesting idea that I don't know where it comes from. I have no idea at all. And then Swan comes back and she says, look, these rules aren't there for your convenience. These rules are there to protect our world from us. I think it's a bit weird, the Aes Sedai calling it our world, as if they literally own it. They don't. But also, I'm not sure the rules are there to protect the world from you. I think, if anything, history proved that actually the rules of the Aes Sedai existed so that the world didn't destroy the Aes Sedai. Because if they find out what you're actually doing and what you're actually like, they tend not to like it. And although the Aes Sedai are incredibly powerful, they can't stand up to the entire world. So they have to deliberately play nice and appear weaker than they might be just to stop a revolution like that. Stop anyone feeling a bit too threatened. Otherwise, they might do something that the Aes Sedai would definitely regret. But either way, Swan actually blames Leandrin for all of this, as it's true, because she was the one controlling it, so it's genuinely her fault, and she says she'll get punished. And in what's supposed to be an intelligent counterstroke, but I don't think it really plays off, Leandrin actually just comes back and says, don't you care about the girl at all? And I'm like, what do you mean? At first I thought she meant the girl that got staked to the wall, and I'm like, don't you actually care about the sister that died? You just talk about Logain and then you're punishing us, and you haven't even mentioned the Aes Sedai that got killed during all of this. And at first I thought that was really clever. I thought that was a good comeback, and I thought that genuinely would have been a nice play. Except that's not what they mean here. No, apparently they mean Nynaeve. And I don't know why, because she goes, look, Moiraine brought the most powerful person that any of us have ever experienced to the actual camp, and none of us knew, and she didn't mention it. And then Moiraine goes, yeah, I didn't know until she channeled either. And Leandra's like, she healed all of us. She's incredibly powerful. She's literally healing people in ways that nobody thought possible, because we've all read the books and it's not in there, so nobody knows how she's done it. And I'm like, what? Because none of that makes sense, because Aes Sedai can literally feel the power level of another woman, or any woman in her vicinity, just as sort of innately. In fact, that's how Aes Sedai literally organize themselves in power ranks. Everyone that's weaker than someone who's more powerful defers to the more powerful person. And you can only have a hierarchical system like that if you know who's more powerful than everybody else. And it's not a physical thing, it's something that has to be felt, and so that's why they have in the books these sort of talent to feel each other's power. So it makes no sense that none of them can feel Nynaeve, and if none of them can feel Nynaeve's power level, then it also, their entire hierarchical structure in the tower no longer makes sense because they can't feel each other's power. And before anyone goes, oh my god, you can't have that, you can't have hierarchical systems based on power, again, I'm pretty sure this is an analogy for how men literally organize themselves in power structures just naturally anyway, as a weaker person lower than stronger person. It's very caveman, which I think's what this was going for. And obviously among men, size of muscles and strength and size, very obvious. And so for the Aes Sedai, they made it very obvious for them. Also, I really like this particular shot, because you can see every other Aes Sedai all in all of their really modest clothing, and then green's gonna green. And I don't know, I didn't think it was that big of a bombshell about Nynaeve. It didn't really make much sense. And she wasn't even going to say anything until Siuan saw her face and then literally asked her, do you have something more to say? So her entire master plan relied on looking like an arse and Siuan actually asking her. It just seems like a really terrible plan. I don't think it was that well thought out. And again, it's meant to be Game of Thrones. Oh, look, we're really intelligent. And it's not. It isn't. So after she's brought up Nynaeve, because who cares, Siuan actually goes, is there a point to this? And I'm like, finally, someone speaks some sense in the scene, because I'm thinking exactly the same thing. What does this have to do with anything? And Liandrin just goes, look, Moiraine's a blue, and she's been roaming the world for the last 20 years. Her job is to gather secrets. And yet all of these things have been happening. Ships have been disappearing off the east coast, and there were Trollocs in the Two Rivers, and Moiraine didn't warn us about any of it. How did she not know all of these things? I'm like, I don't know. Maybe it's because you're in a Victorian civilization, which is literally doesn't have phones, and she's one person roaming a genuinely massive world, and you have no idea what she's doing. And yet you expect her to know literally everything when she's out in the wild doing something else. Meanwhile, you're at the Aes Sedai headquarters, the White Tower, with literally all of the messenger birds, and obviously homing pigeons only go to one place. So you'd have to communicate between cities and the White Tower, and the White Tower would be literally the central location for all communications. And you expect Moiraine to be solely to blame for every event in the entire world and not telling you about them, even though you're literally the center of all knowledge in the entire nation. And look, I really like Rosamund Pike. I think she's done a great job acting out what she's unfortunately been given so far. But to blame any one person for all of this is complete insanity and doesn't make any sense. Like, literally, you can't spend previous episodes making Moiraine look stupid, and then also in the next one, rely on her being some omnipotent god. It doesn't make any sense. And then Liandrin does the sort of ultimate dig. She's like, maybe you just don't want to tell Moiraine, ask Moiraine where she's been, because you were a blue yourself. And of course, the Merlin is supposed to be from Noajar and of all of them, so it's like, oh, you can't ask that. And this forces her to actually ask her where she's been. And now, you would think that she would have asked her to a point where she could have weaseled out of it. So Siuan asks her, she's like, where have you been? And she says, look, I've been from Tyr to the Two Rivers and many places in between. And then Siuan goes, so what's the purpose of your visit? You'd think she was in charge, but she's not acting like it. And Moiraine just doesn't try anything, doesn't try any word games, doesn't try and weasel out of it, doesn't try and just say something in two halves. No, instead she's just like, I can't tell you. And Siuan's like, cannot or will not. And we're really dragging it out because we're just giving Moiraine as much time as possible to actually say something above the level of 10 IQ. And Moiraine just goes, I can't say. Oh, you are destroying the character. She's meant to be a master of words, and she just literally is replying like a petulant little brat. And so she's made to get on the floor. Like at this point, I think everyone agrees she deserves. And Siuan just loses it and goes on some weird tyrannical rant, which isn't her character at all. And she's like, look, you petulant little child, you think you can do anything outside the city? Well, I own all of it. I own this tower, this city, and I own everything from Tyr to the Two Rivers and every town in between. It's all mine. And I'm like, that's not Siuan. It's not Siuan. I don't think I ever heard any Aes Sedai talk like that. That's not what they talk about. It's not how they talk. I don't know, maybe you're going back and you're trying to make out she's one of the previous Merlins, but she isn't. I just wanted Siuan to be Siuan, not someone else. And she's just like, oh, you dare challenge me? Put your forehead and your tongue on the floor. Just because you think you're a lady of noble blood, you think you can challenge me? And I'm like, no, the Aes Sedai didn't give a damn about noble blood. They were all the same. They didn't have class structure. That's not how they structured anything. They structured themselves based on their strength and the power. You can't keep bringing this up from episode 1. You can't simultaneously have Aes Sedai, which turn away peasants like the wisdom from episode 1, to have Siuan, who's literally a fisherwoman who became the Merlin seat, to then have the Merlin seat giving a damn about Moiraine's noble blood. Like, literally, none of this makes sense. You're not writing this like it makes any sense, because it doesn't make any sense. Stop it. So Siuan turns completely tyrannical, Moiraine just completely gives up and starts kissing the floor, and everybody forgets what happened, and literally no one even asks the question. Because after all this, when Moiraine has left after that weird, bizarre show, Liandrin comes up to her and doesn't ask the most obvious question of all. why didn't you answer? And you still haven't answered. Like, literally, Swan can give off this big, impressive show and start ranting like some kind of insane tyrant. But everyone shouldn't have just forgot the main question. What have you been doing outside the tower? Like, literally, just ask her again. But no, apparently, we've all forgotten because we all have memories of goldfish. A woman started shouting at another woman, and that just means that I don't know. We're just moving on now. We're moving on. So instead, Leandrin just starts threatening her. She's like, tomorrow when you receive your judgment, that's when you'll really suffer. And it's like, don't you actually care about what she's been doing? That was literally the point of the question. And you didn't get your only answer that you actually cared about. But now, just because she's going to get punished, you've forgotten all about the only thing you cared about. Right. Next up, Moiraine's sipping tea, waiting for Nynaeve and Loial to leave Rand's room. I don't know why. I mean, you have to remember that Nynaeve actually found Rand faster than she did, despite Moiraine apparently having watchers on every gate and wall. Even though every gate and wall isn't actually that much, they're on a little island and there isn't that many entryways. But Rand still got past them all because Moraine's terrible at everything she does or something, despite apparently being the creator who literally needs to know everything. Yes, Moiraine is literally the ultimate oxymoron. So Moiraine talks to Rand and she's like, Matt doesn't seem very well. How long's he been like this? And Rand goes, about a month, but he's only got a fever. He'll be fine. And like, he's had a fever for a month. And you think that's fine? Are you actually clinically mentally deficient? I don't know, because there's something. There has to be something wrong with you to think that it's okay to have a fever for a month. And then Matt chirps up and he's like, oh, I know what you do to men like me, implying that men that can channel. Except Matt must have worked out by now that he can't channel. Literally, you go to the most evil place on earth and then pick up a dagger and carry it with you for a month, and that's when you start to get ill. Maybe you should put 2 and 2 together? I don't know. But Rand actually has a spine for the first time in 6 episodes and pulls his sword on him. I mean, of course, in the only time that Rand has actually pulled his sword on someone, it's the only time he's being a complete moron. But here we are. And so Lan actually steps in and stops him and starts holding him down. You have to remember, this is one of the greatest warriors of all time, holding down a little child with no training whatsoever. But he seems to really be struggling, because what happens next is that Matt says the world doesn't need a dragon like me, and immediately pulls his dagger on Moiraine. And I know what you're thinking, Lan is Moraine's warder. He would immediately be across that room in an instant, like he hadn't even moved across the space in between, and stop that dagger in his tracks. Because that's literally what he did in this scene in the books. But not in this one, no. Moiraine is a strong woman and she don't need no man protecting her. That's right. Lan literally would have let his Aes Sedai die because he was trying to hold a little sheep herder with no physical training in battle at all. And that was just keeping all of Lan's attention. He can't do 2 things at once. He can't protect a sheep herder and stop a knife. It's just more than Lan can handle. Lan, it might be, in this story, one of the worst warders of all time if he can't even stop a sheep herder and a knife. No, Moiraine has to protect herself. Remember, as we said in episode 1, women are always on their own. You can't rely on a man to protect you, even if he's your warder, because he'll probably just be crap and holding a sheep herder or something when you're about to die. But she asks the boys to hold Matt down, because obviously it's not a job that Lan can do himself. Lan just starts holding down his left arm for some reason, despite the fact that he's got 2. I don't know. Lan's just terrible in this episode. Now, what happens next is obviously, it's all just CGI magic stuff. And I think this is one of the better bits. I don't actually know how you'd visualize this any other way, because in the books, it's definitely more mental. She's putting barriers sort of internally. And so it's more like a battle of wills between Moiraine and the actual evil itself. So I think if you're going to do something visually like this, I'm fine with this. I think it looks decent. I think the magic as a whole looks pretty good in the show. And I think this whole visualization of the magic is one of the strong points, even to the fact that as it's trying to come across her, it's actually trying to infect her as well, but she just kind of forces it all back into the dagger. I do like the graphics, and I think the reason that's good is because it doesn't actually require any writing at all. And this is definitely shown in the next bit, where they manage to completely and utterly destroy all of Book 2 in about 2 sentences. But first, the dagger drops to the floor. This is one of the most evil, most infectious items in the entire world. But don't worry, because Lan has made it safe. Lan has protected everybody by covering it in a bedsheet. Thanks, Lan. So then we see Moiraine, and she's very tired after what she's done, although I think she should probably be more tired, as in basically on the verge of collapsing after what she's just done. And what happens between them is a conversation which, if you've not read the books, you probably won't realize its importance. And if you have, you will realize that this is literally the single most destructive conversation that has happened out of any episode so far. No matter what they've done to make characters appear different, to change any of the magic systems or anything else, is nothing compared to the impacts that this will have on literally at least the next series. But it starts innocuously enough when Rand goes, look, I thought you were going to harm him, but you actually helped him, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm like, yeah, but you thought she'd harm him because he could channel, and this had nothing to do with him channeling. This was the dagger. So she saved him with the dagger, but if he could channel, then you might have been right, and you have no reason to think otherwise. And I think this is meant to be Rand changing his mind about it. Now, you have to remember as well, they didn't really give him any reason to dislike her in the first place. I mean, the only instance I can even think of, because he's barely been in a company in this entire series, is the ferryman. That's basically what it all goes down to, because they removed the initial book lore of him actually thinking Aes Sedai were dark friends. That was normally his motivation, but in this it's replaced by the ferryman. And I think it was the ferryman's fault. The ferryman was the one that decided to jump into the river and die as the ferry went down. It really had nothing to do with Moiraine. You can just blame her because she didn't save him. But that doesn't make anything with regards to Mat. So his entire point of view doesn't make sense to begin with, and it doesn't make sense why it's changed now. And all of his beliefs should be the same, but they're not. And you just end up with this ever-expanding spiral of possibilities that literally not a single route through any of them make any sense whatsoever. But it's the next comment which is the most disastrous. When she said, I've actually healed the connection between Mat and the dagger. And she did it on her own, and she did it in seconds. This is the most evil item on the face of the planet, pretty much. This is something which is so dangerous, so deadly, and so infectious, that if it actually infects someone, it doesn't just turn that person evil. It actually turns them into a vector for that evil, and so any person they meet also turns into them, and then any person they meet also turns into them. This is like Lord of the Rings, The One Ring on steroids. That's kind of what the dagger was meant to be, I think. And so essentially, this could take over the entire world. It is that dangerous. But don't worry, because Moiraine solved it all in a few seconds on her own, and it only made her a bit out of breath. In fact, the last time we saw Moiraine this out of breath panting was when she saw Swan's arse walking up the stairs towards the Merlin's throne. But it doesn't just stop there. This isn't just we killed him, and that doesn't really make sense, because it makes Moiraine far more powerful than it should do. I mean, in the books, it did take basically massive amounts of sisters and hours to actually even semi-heal him. No, we're going to ignore all of that. The fact that he was never actually cured at this point, because actually curing him from touching the dagger now completely destroys his entire motivation for the second book. And everyone else's. But no, in this, it's like, no, I cured him, mate. I cured him easy, on my own, because I don't have any dangly bits, and that means I am awesome. And so I can just destroy the second book as much as I want. It's not going to change anything. I'm like, okay. Are you going to rewrite the second book, then? You're going to rewrite all of the characters' motivations, are you? That's your plan. Right. I mean, why not? You've done it for everything else. It's not like it can get any worse. And then they make it worse. Yes, now the dagger. The dagger's not just evil. It's not like it's an evil dagger that makes Mat evil. No. It was feeding off the darkness inside Mat. And this is why they had to change him in the first episode. Gone is the time where Mat was he was a fun little prankster. That's all he was. He wasn't evil or a thief or a degenerate or anything else. He just liked playing pranks on people. But in this, they had to make him complete filth. And the reason for that is because they wanted the dagger to go, no, the dagger isn't just evil. It was actually, Mat was making the dagger even more evil himself. And I'm like, oh, no. Yeah, Mat can't be here anymore. No, I guess they're going to say something like, the dagger only called out to Mat because Mat was quite evil himself in the first place, or something like that. I mean, completely destroys his character, and the fact that he really values his word, and that he was always good, to the point that I will sacrifice myself to save somebody else as long as I promise to help them. Yeah, all of that's got out the window, because now Mat is just a typical evil male like everybody else. And finally, someone's put Nynaeve in her place, the most annoying character out of the entire series, because she turns up and her first question is, how did you find them? She's an Aes Sedai. What do you want her to do? She's literally in a center of power, but here we are. And Moiraine just goes, look, a better question would be, why didn't you find me? I mean, your pride would have killed them. And she's absolutely right. I said in the last one, Nynaeve was just like, no, we're going to save them through the power of friendship. I mean, she thinks he's a man who can channel or literally go mad and destroy the world. But no, through the power of friendship in Disney movies, we'll go into a hill somewhere, and I, Nynaeve, the best person in the world, will personally save him from literally one of the most fundamental realities of the world. I, Nynaeve, and more powerful than the Dark One himself and his entire master plan. And I'm like, oh god. The saving grace of this was literally putting Nynaeve in her place when she said, if you want to call yourself a wisdom, you might do yourself a favor and show some for once. And I'm just like, yes, finally someone talked to her like has been needed to from the entire beginning of the show. This is a woman who's done literally nothing except being absolutely amazing and trying to murder Lan in cold blood for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Next is a scene of Game of Thrones, and I can't show you most of the frames in this. Now, in Game of Thrones, they literally said the reason for this is because they couldn't think of a way to keep the audience interested and entertained, because they just had to dump story and exposition on them, and the only way they thought they could make that interesting and keep the audience around was to basically show people with no clothes on. And that's what they're doing here, apparently, except this exposition basically can be summarized in one thing. Moiraine, you're staying in the tower because we need to go out and look for some sinking ships. That's basically the entire thing that's said here. It's the only story plot. We didn't need Game of Thrones. Wheel of Time is good enough to stand on its own 2 feet, as long as you actually replicate what is the lore says and what the books is. But now you've rewritten it and you've made it trash, now you think the only way you can keep any kind of viewers is if you put these kind of seeds in. And while on the one hand, I do appreciate you actually balancing out the land scene from the first episode, I think what's good for the goose is good for the gander. The scenes just don't seem to fit in the rest of the show. It doesn't feel right. It's weird. Like, it comes completely out of nowhere. It doesn't serve any purpose. There's no reason that this should be happening here. In fact, the sitter actually comes in and everybody else leaves. So this isn't even like a private bathroom or anything. It's not like, oh yeah, that's perfectly normal that people would be meeting there. Because if you were keeping tabs on these people, you would immediately see the sitter enter where Moiraine is, and then everyone else except Moiraine leave. And so now you know they're having a private meeting in a bathroom, which is exactly what you wanted to avoid by presumably meeting in private in the first place, letting everyone know that you were meeting. Otherwise, you could have just met anywhere else. So not only do I just not think the concept really belongs in Wheel of Time at all, but also the story reason for it doesn't make any sense. And one thing that made me laugh during this is where the sitter goes, oh yeah, we've improved our spy network. I mean, literally, this is the Aes Sedai. They've had a spy network for thousands of years. It should be perfect by now. I don't know what there is to improve or why you had such big gaps to begin with. But she's like, oh yeah, we've heard that you sunk the ferryman's boat, and so we sent them money to compensate. And I'm like, hang on. The guy died. The ferryman died in this. Now, in the books, Moiraine actually says that I will send him money to compensate him for sinking his ferry, and that makes sense, because the guy's alive. But in this, they killed him, so money just seems like rather vindictive. It's like, yeah, well, I mean, admittedly, we did leave this guy to die. You could have picked him up and saved him, but you decided not to. But we gave him family some money, so that's fine. It's fine at the end of the day. I'm like, what? It just seems really incredibly callous. And this is, again, the kind of thing where we've gone from their fan fiction in the show to the actual lore and what happened in the books, and the two don't match up because you changed them. And so you probably just shouldn't have changed them, because you can't keep things straight in your own head. And I can follow this. If I can follow this, why can't your scriptwriters? Now, Moiraine meets one of her eyes and ears, who has found Perrin and Egwene. And they're like, so how long have they been in the city? And she replies, oh, I think they've been about a day. Maybe 2. It's not been long. And I'm like, what? How have they been in there for 2 days and you've not found them? Like, this is an island with very few entry points, and Moiraine literally said she got people on every entrance and every wall, which she must have done because she can't lie. And so, what? These two just snuck into the city as well, just like Rand and Matt, and nobody saw them on the very few entranceways to this island for 2 days? Again, if your eyes and ears are crap, and you're the one that recruited them into your spy network, then it makes Moiraine look stupid. But Moiraine meets Egwene and Perrin, and obviously Perrin is asleep, because otherwise, he might say something and we can't have that. So Egwene's just like, well, where's Matt and Rand? And Moiraine starts lying to her for some reason that doesn't make much sense. But she goes, look, when they arrive, I'll know. And it's like, and she says, I've got people watching for him, which makes sense. I'm sure she's got people watching for him all over the world. So it's sort of dissembling, but it just seems to be dissembling for no reason whatsoever. I don't think there's any reason not to tell them they're already arrived in Tar Valon. It seems odd. But Egwene's like, yeah, don't worry about it. We ran into some white cloaks. We had a bit of trouble, but I'm amazing. I handled it all on my own, and Valda won't be troubling your sisters anymore. And I'm like, are you implying that you killed him? Because I'm pretty sure you didn't. I'm pretty sure you just stabbed a little dagger into his sort of shoulder area. I don't think it was lethal, but apparently Egwene is pretty sure, despite having no formal training or education about what to do or where to stab or when people are dead. No, besides all of that, she's definitely sure that she definitely killed him, which I'm assuming means he definitely isn't. But she hangs the Aes Sedai rings back to Moiraine. I think they're meant to sort of resemble dog tags. I don't know, it all seems a bit weird to me. And Egwene starts telling Moiraine about Perrin's eyes, about how they're yellow, and she's like, oh my god, don't tell any of the sisters that he's got yellow eyes, because there's people in this tower that will want to harm him. And I'm like, I don't think there is. There shouldn't be. There's literally at the start of book 2 a whole section where Perrin is around numerous Aes Sedai, and they see his eyes, because unlike this, his eyes are sort of yellow all the time in the books once he's activated. And so it's obvious. Aes Sedai see him all of the time, and they're curious because it's weird. But everyone knows it's not something to do with the Dark One, so nobody cares. Like I said in the last one, even the White Cloaks didn't care that he had yellow eyes. So I don't know why it's a big deal in this. It just doesn't make any sense. But what comes next is even more stupid. Because Egwene goes, oh, does that mean that he's the dragon? And Moiraine gives possibly one of the most unwieldy sentences that could be possible to speak. And it just shouldn't be written this way, which is why we don't. And she's like, oh, there's so many prophecies, and we just don't know who the dragon may be. We don't know who he or she will be, and we don't know what powers he or she may have. And I'm like, nobody speaks like that. Literally, no one just throws out pronoun spam randomly, because it's unnecessary and it overcomplicates the language. I mean, everyone knows that man stands for human, and in all legal text, he means he or she. It's just redundant to say both of them, and nobody does, because it's redundant, and it's just very, very weird and complicated and sounds odd, but we're saying it here just to drive the point home. But don't worry, because although Moiraine is a master of language, she hasn't quite grasped all of these basic linguistic language rules that all of us innately know from little kids, and so that is why she speaks how she does. So then Lan finds Moiraine, and she's dressed in probably one of the most hideous bedroom gowns I think I've ever seen in my life. It's probably only beaten by the Merlin's dress herself, which is quite handy while given the scene. Lan's like, you have actually hidden your bond from me. And she's like, yes, it's been 20 years and you have always been able to feel me. So I've sort of smothered it so you can't sense me anymore. And it's just so you can focus. I just need you to focus on those and not worry about me. And Lan's like, well, if I can't sense you, then I'll probably almost certainly worry about you more. And she's like, yeah, don't worry about me. You just go and do your own thing. And I'm like, it seems a bit weird, because Lan just takes that explanation at face value and walks off. I mean, he doesn't even question it, despite the fact that he knows literally everything about Moiraine, and Moiraine doesn't keep any secrets from Lan, and that's fundamental to their entire relationship. No, in this, he just takes something that doesn't make sense and leaves. But then Moiraine channels in a dress which I really hope is taped down, and we find out that the item from the trailer is some kind of Ter Angreal, and she basically teleports straight into Swan's bedroom. Yes, if you saw this one coming, congratulations. If you wanted to see a 42-year-old and a 52-year-old going at it, then this is a scene for you. I'm not going to show it because this is YouTube, but the show definitely loves kind of just gratuitous everything at this point. And it is gratuitous because it's also not true. You see, in the books, yes, it's very common for the Aes Sedai to have pillow friends when they're novices and apprentices. It's because there's no men around to do anything with, and also that's kind of a tough life. It's designed to be. And so it was more seen as just a way of dealing with things that actually, even if you weren't that way inclined, they still kind of went along with it. But when they became Aes Sedai and they got to go out into the world, they kind of left that behind. And none of this is my opinion. None of this is anything to do with me. You can't judge me for this. This is literally what's written in the books that I'm repeating to you. And if you don't like it, take it up with Robert Jordan, but you'll probably have trouble with that because he's dead. So what you've got here is Rafe completely changing the orientation of two characters. Just carrying on something that they did from kids into their adulthood. And I don't know why. Like, literally, this doesn't fit either of their characters. Even if they were that way inclined, and they're not, it wouldn't make much sense because both Suian and Moiraine both had bigger problems than worrying about who they were going to clam slam next. They're literally two people obsessed with saving the world. They're literally doing it in different ways. And so I know this is meant to be a big, impactful reveal, but all I can think is, what are you doing? This isn't important. Why are you just obsessed with this? And it is an obsession. And if you're like, why do you care so much about this? It's not me that cares about it. It's Rafe that cares about it. That's why Rafe put it in the show. None of this actually happened, and so it's Rafe which has put this in for his own gratification. I'm just pointing out that all of this is a load of twaddle. Now, the really weird part is how I've seen it brought up many times that only actually actors of that orientation should play gay characters on the screen, but I haven't heard anything about that with regards to the Wheel of Time. Now, Moiraine and Suian are both straight in real life, and so this is clearly a problem. Except I can only think that nobody complains about it in this show, simply for the fact that if they actually obeyed those rules, then they probably would have run out of actors a long time ago. But don't worry, because Moiraine told Suian to get on her knees, which is exactly what Suian said to Moiraine back in the Sitters Hall. Yes, it's very clever writing, and I hope you really enjoy the callback. But Moiraine goes, "Look, I found the dragon," and Suian immediately replies, "The girl from the Two Rivers?" I'm like, what, that's your first thought? Your first thought is it's the person which the prophecies specifically say it's not? What? And they actually go into that in this scene itself. You see, Moiraine's like, I found 5 possible dragons, but only 4 of them are the right age. And I'm like, so you found 4 possible dragons because they're literally not the right age? So it's impossible for Nynaeve to be the dragon. That's what you're saying. And then she starts going on about, oh, well, there's all these prophecies and they're all really old. And like, well, prophecies predict the future and time isn't relevant to a prophecy because it's all the future anyway. Like, literally, predicting what you're going to do in a year is no more difficult than predicting what someone's going to do in 3,000 years, especially if it's magic and I'm seeing the future. It's not like it's more difficult, it's just what the pattern spits out. And because the pattern is basically preordained, or at least desirable, then that's what these prophecies are. It's what the pattern wants to put out. And so not believing it is bad as not believing in the pattern itself or the wheel, and she definitely does. But it seems like she doesn't believe these because they're translated into 3,000 different languages. And I'm like, okay, well, if you don't believe the translations, then just read the original text. It's not that complicated, and it's something that Moiraine definitely did. And then even Suian's like, but you were there. You were literally there with me, the only two in the throne room, when the sitter actually predicted the future and said that the dragon has been reborn. You were literally there 20 years ago in front of someone predicting the future and having a foretelling, and then she immediately dies because the foretelling is that powerful. It basically burns her out then and there on the spot. And Moiraine's like, yeah, but I don't really believe that either. And I'm like, what? What even is this? This certainly isn't Moiraine's character. This certainly isn't the Wheel of Time. They just believed the prophecies because they were true, because it was magic. And Rafe just comes in with his tiny little brain and goes, oh, well, in the real world, we don't believe in prophecies because you can't predict the future in the real world. And I'm like, this isn't the real world. This is a fantasy world. And in this fantasy world, the prophecies are true. But you had to try and crowbar this in. You had to crowbar this in just so you could try and pretend that Nynaeve might possibly be the dragon for some reason. Nobody knows why. It doesn't enhance the plot in any way. But because you started from that idea, you had to actually mess up the entire rest of the story and create something that doesn't even make sense. Even by your own law, it's literally impossible for her to be the dragon because she's too old. But everyone still believes that she might be, even though it's literally impossible under your own story for her to be, for no reason, and you don't explain it, and you don't even give Moiraine a possible logical reason for it. I know that you, Rafe, might possibly believe things at the same time, which are literally contradictory, but for normal human beings who actually obey logic and reason and have some kind of vague air of intelligence about them, they can't hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time. So I just suggest, just for the benefit of all the normal people in your audience, that you actually just pick an idea and stick with it. Although I do like the next bit where they're talking about the Dark One himself. Oh, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about what the Dark One is. The Dark One is definitely male. The definite most evil thing in the world, Satan himself, is definitely male, and there's no doubt about it. The person saving the world, I mean, that could be either or both or neither, but the Dark One 100% has dangly bits. Now, the biggest abomination of this scene is when Moiraine goes, oh my god, a gleeman told me about a multi-headed dragon. And then Swan's like, well, why would the wheel spin a soul into multiple parts? And the answer is it wouldn't, because it can't. And in fact, there's very important characters and storylines in the future that rely on people not getting split up. In fact, even your own lore in the first episode is literally like, we send these off to wait for the actual souls of people to come back and actually be reborn. There's never been a mention of anyone getting split up in the past, and it's so complicated to go into this without actually saying spoilers for future episodes. So all I'm going to say is the words horn and voices, and none of those stories will make sense if this turns out to be true, and it will be literally a complete abomination to everything in every story possible, and that would fracture the plot into so many different fractured pieces that literally no one could defend that as the Wheel of Time. No one. But don't worry, it can always get worse. The next blasphemy is that Swan is now having various different visions about the Dark One at the Eye of the World. And at first I thought, what, is he traveling there or something? And I'm like, no, they do something worse than that. But in this, she just goes, he's at the Eye of the World and he's weak and we can defeat him if we all go together. And I'm like, this is a twisted version of Min's vision. That's why they go there in the books. And Min has been cast, but she hasn't been introduced so far. So you're literally picking up somebody else's part and giving it to Swan so you can have this scene, because there's no other reason for this scene at all. I don't know why it happens. This is a scene from book 2. There's no reason to put it in here. You could have not had this scene and had Min involved, and she could have done her part from book 1. But we're just flipping everything around and stealing things to give to other people for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And we're making it kind of blasphemous along the way. Yeah, and the entire vision to me really feels more like a trap than anything else, because you're like, we can do it. We can get the power. If we all go, some will die, yeah, but the others won't. And we can get him right now when he's weak. And I'm like, you sound really dodgy. No one's questioning it. I'm questioning it. But then Moiraine just goes, oh, but I need to be exiled because the Blues want me to remain behind, so make my punishment tomorrow exiling. And she's like, okay, and is really tearful and upset. And I don't know why she's tearful and upset, because it's literally what Moiraine is asking to do, and she's barely in the tower anyway, so I don't know why you're bothered. You're also the only person that can reverse the exile, so you're the one in complete control, and it's just not a big deal, but we're supposed to act like it is. Next up, Liandrin blackmails Rain, and she's like, look, I know you've been meeting other people from the Two Rivers. Now more people from the Two Rivers arrived. It's Perrin and Egwene as well, and I don't know why you're meeting them over there. It looks like Liandrin actually has good eyes and ears in Tar Valon, which I think is a lot more than we can say for Moraine's, but here we are. And then Moiraine just blackmails her, going, I know you've been seeing another man down by the pier, and if you don't back off, then I'm going to tell your Red Sisters about him, and we know what they'll do to a man. And I'm like, okay, kind of like that. It's definitely Moraine's character, definitely blackmailing people, having that already set up in advance and having ways to deal with every person if they actually get in her way is exactly the kind of character. So I actually like this scene. Congratulations, you've done something for Moiraine, which is actually Moiraine. Good. The only thing I'd say is it's a bit blunt and fast, and it's a bit overly done and blunt, but you could say she was in a rush, so as far as I'm concerned, it works. Then Moiraine meets Loial, and she's like, look, we're in a major crisis, but you're here as a builder, and that's amazing, because it looks like the wheel may have provided us a crisis, but also a way to solve it. And this is actually a line from the books, and it's a line that she says to Loial, and it's great. Except that they actually do something which means he's not even required at all, and it makes this entire scene redundant. So this is one of the few scenes which they've actually taken from the books, albeit moved to Tar Valon, and taken the lines from the books and said them, and then a few minutes later, all of it is completely and utterly redundant, and they just change everything anyway, and so literally what she's just said makes no sense, even though it was actually said originally. You couldn't write this. Next, Moiraine takes Egwene to meet Nynaeve, and it turns out that actually it's because the Merlin seat Suan herself wants to talk to them both. Doesn't want to talk to the boys, no, just the two girls. Kind of makes sense. I guess you could argue it because they can both channel, so it's at least an excuse. I don't know, but when she's like, you've got to go and see the Merlin seat now, and Nynaeve's like, she can wait, and Moiraine just walks off and goes, she only waits for one woman, and it's not you. I mean, obviously she means herself, but I'm not sure referring to yourself as the only woman she'll wait for, as being literally, she'll only wait for someone that sits on her face, is exactly the best look for Suan. I don't think that's particularly complimentary herself, but hey, I didn't write the script, Rafe did, and Rafe definitely made sure why he's made all of these changes himself. So if you disagree with any of the messaging, you know why. Now, Egwene does say, isn't it weird to have a woman and a throne named the same thing, referring to they're both called the Merlin seat? And Moraine's like, well, why don't you ask her? And I'm like, no, why don't you don't? It's not weird at all. It's very easy, and everybody that understands even the basic foundations of language would be able to understand context, and we have many actual versions of this in our real life as well. I mean, look, if I go to you and say, Egwene, I really need you to polish the Merlin seat, if you start taking some polish and a duster to the actual woman, I'm going to think you're literally insane. I don't understand why Egwene doesn't even understand even the basic rudimental principles of language, but she's stupid. I don't say that. The script did. And if anyone disagrees, it's literally in the books and it's written down, so you have no actual context apart from the language itself, and not a single time do I believe anybody actually struggled to understand the difference between the Merlin seat and the Merlin seat, although apparently Rafe did, which probably says more about him than literally everybody else in the world. And when the two of them met, Egwene goes, oh my god, Nynaeve, I thought you were dead. And Nynaeve goes, yeah, the Trolloc did too, referring back to episode 2, and I really think this is some kind of ad hoc post-rationalization about people complaining that, or the scriptwriters realizing that it literally made no sense how Nynaeve escaped from a Trolloc and why the Trolloc let her go. And so they're just like, how can we explain that? How can we explain that? The Trolloc thought she was dead. And I'm like, that's really weird, because you see it in episode 1 when she's dragged away, and it's not like she's unconscious on the floor or anything. She's literally standing up and moving, and the Trolloc just drags her off. So that Trolloc knew that she was definitely alive because he hadn't killed her herself, and he got her when she was alive. So, no, you're gonna have to try that one again, because that one doesn't work. But then Suan calls in Egwene and Nynaeve to tell them that they are just the bestest girls in the world ever. These people are amazing, and they have the entire world on their shoulders. Just the two of them. Just the two of them. No one else. No, just them, because they're women, and that means they're amazing, and the entire world is for them, because they're probably the dragon. They are probably, one of them is the dragon. I mean, one of them, we've literally already described how it's physically impossible for Nynaeve to be the dragon. Even under the rules of the show, it is literally impossible, because she's too old. I mean, we've got a prophecy saying the exact second that the Dragon Reborn was born, and Nynaeve already existed at that moment. It's literally impossible, but it probably isn't, because it might not be, because Nynaeve is just the bestest ever, and that is what the show wants you to realize. And then Suan comes out with literally something like, it's never been said, it doesn't happen. The wheel spins out your threads, and it gives you choices and challenges, and it doesn't care whether you're afraid, and it doesn't care whether you can bear it or not. And I'm like, that's literally not how it works. I mean, if Rafe has read the books and that's what he took from them, that's literally wrong, and you don't understand anything about it at all. It's like, literally, the reason why lots of people exist as characters in the books is to train the Dragon Reborn and everybody else, to give them the tools and the training and the mission and the life experience in order to handle what they need to handle in the future. That's why all these people pop into their stories. That's why people literally are forced to travel the world so that they can just meet those people and train them to handle what's needed in the future. But apparently now, no, it just throws challenges at you and hopes you can handle it, but if you can't, it's no big wash. We'll just drag out another dragon, it's no big deal. No, it's not like the literal fate of the world and the wheel itself actually is determined by that and relies on that. No, it's fine, it's fine. It's just anybody. It's all fine. As long as you've got the bestest girls ever on the case, they can solve anything. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what's happening to the boys during all of this? And what's happened is literally nothing this entire episode, or the last one. And the only reason it's even remotely acceptable for Siuan to go, oh, well, people don't get trained. No, it just gives you tests. Just tests you. It's not like it teaches you and trains you and educates you and makes you ready for those tests. It doesn't do that, because it hasn't in this story. Everybody that people were supposed to meet to train them and educate them and get them ready for the future challenges, they haven't met, they've been deleted, or those scenes were cut. So it's actually right in this that the wheel is just an arse. It's just an arse that doesn't help you at all. But in the actual books, it's actually well written. Things are actually thought of in advance. Problems are thought of in advance, and the solutions for those problems are already given to the people involved long before they actually meet those problems. And she's like, the wheel doesn't care what you want because it calls you to this. It calls you too to this. I think it's weird that because it never did before. And she's very, very specific during this entire scene that she means the two of those. I hope you've got that sense of foreboding. And now my favourite thing about the whole Moiraine Siuan storyline is that Moiraine covered the water bond so he didn't know. She's keeping secrets from Lan in a show where literally there is no secrets between them, and there couldn't be. If Lan needed to do his job correctly, then he needed to know everything. Moiraine actually respected him and trusted him in everything apart from this. Of course, this isn't true here. While this same reveal was done in the books about whole Moiraine and Siuan being actually in it together, it was done at the start of book 2, Lan knew about it. Because of course he did, because there's no secrets between them. But in this, Moiraine doesn't trust Lan. She might trust him a bit, but she doesn't trust him. Because if she did, she'd tell him this. Next, we have this kind of iconic scene from the trailer, and I'm like, yes, it's a green screen, but I also think it looks awesome, so nice. Now, we're back in the Hall of the Tower, and Moiraine is about to get exiled, but we start with Moiraine kissing Siuan's ring, which she does with extreme precision, because she practiced it a lot the night before. Now, there's this whole scene where Siuan is actually introduced as being clever as a pike, being the daughter of the river, and I'm like, those are some of the worst titles I've ever heard. Like, there's lots of... people get lots of titles for things they've actually done and stuff, but Aes Sedai calling someone clever as a pike? Honestly, is that the best you can do? Because it really doesn't fit. But for the exile, they get out the Oath Rod. This is essentially a magical binding thing, and it's very, very important, because this is what the Aes Sedai oaths come from. The fact that literally things like you can't use the one power except to defend your own life against the shadow or one of your sisters or whatever. All of that is very important with the wording, because these are Aes Sedai and they play language games. So the wording matters exactly, and if you can get around that or think of a loophole, you get around it, and the oath means nothing. This is how Moiraine can actually do something like essentially lie. Well, like when she called the Aes Sedai her sisters, and she said, well, all Aes Sedai are sisters. She considers them to be her sisters, so she can say that. Because and as far as she's concerned, she's actually telling the truth. Even though by any objective state of reality, they're not sisters and it's a lie. So the words matter. And the words in this are awful. I mean, they're okay at first. They make sense at first. And then they add in the last bit, which just makes no sense whatsoever and basically invalidates the entire oath. Because you can see the magical bonding, but she essentially says, you agree to be exiled and you will never return until Siuan calls me home, or whoever happens to be in Merlin's seat at the time, calls you home. And if I don't do this, then may the Creator turn away from me and my soul be consumed by darkness. And the problem there is Moiraine has no actual choice about being consumed by darkness or what the Creator does. It doesn't matter what magic you have in the world, there is no magic which would overrule the Creator, and just because you promise something, you're not going to compel the Creator to do anything with or without your soul. So this is literally, they could have just had it going, I won't return until I'm called back, and ended it there, and it would have been fine, there's no loopholes. Sorted. But now it's, I won't return unless I'm called back, or I'm willing for the Creator to turn his back on me and my soul could be consumed by darkness. But because you can't control what the Creator does, or whether you're consumed by darkness or not, you can literally return whenever you want with no side effects, because the only caveat of this entire thing is something that literally no one can control. So it's literally like, as long as you're willing to just go, the Creator can turn away from me, you can just do whatever you want and break any oath you want. This is such a big loophole that literally Aes Sedai would just be driving cavalry charges through this till the end of time. This doesn't make any sense, and they should have just stopped after saying you wouldn't return unless you were asked. Like, literally, once you've got something which is clear and makes sense, stop. Because adding in the last bit just made the entire first bit completely and utterly redundant in the only thing it's meant to achieve. But then she gets exiled and all of the sisters and everything turn their backs on her as she walks out. And I've seen the Twitter post going, oh my god, this is so emotional. This is so emotional. She's leaving behind her home and everyone she cares about. And I'm like, did you even watch any of the other episodes at all? Not only does she not consider this home, but the only reason she came back and the only person in this that she apparently likes is Swan. And Swan is literally the person that can control when she comes back or not, at a moment's notice whenever she wants. And she's being sent away to do a mission which she was going to leave to do anyway in the first place. Like, this has all the emotional impact of Lan crying like a little baby in the last episode. It's something that they think is really emotionally powerful and carries literally no weight because it doesn't make any sense. Not for the characters involved, not for the situation, and not for Moiraine. Moiraine is getting literally everything she wants, everything that she was going to do anyway, and it's costing her literally nothing. Because this isn't her home that she's leaving behind. She doesn't really care about any of these people. And the only person that she does care about is in a relationship with is Swan. And Swan literally said, you can come back whenever I ask you to. So the only way this would have an emotional impact is if Moiraine, firstly, actually wanted to stay in the tower. And secondly, wasn't actually having a relationship with Swan or some secret meetings with Swan in the first place. And most of that would have been true in the books. But because you're not sticking to the books and you've wrote your own storyline, now you've confused yourself and made an emotional scene that doesn't actually carry any weight if you actually understand what you've just said. Congratulations, folks! Congratulations! So we get Moiraine fake crying, even though literally this would have no emotional impact on her at all because she doesn't care about any of this stuff. And she travels to a waygate. I mean, this waygate looks nothing like a waygate. It doesn't make any sense for this to be a waygate, and it doesn't make any sense for her to know where the waygate is. The waygates were literally grown by Ogier, and so they were meant to be sort of greenish. They had leaves engraved on them, and in fact, they were controlled by leaves. And I literally mean were. But also, they were meant to be done in groves, right? The tree groves of the Ogier were literally how they were created. Now, you can see in this picture that there is literally trees all around it. Literally all around this thing is an entire forest. So you're like, okay, that makes sense. The Ogier grew trees all around it. Except for everything in its nearby vicinity. So they've literally grown trees and just left a big circle for the waygate in the middle for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Or someone's come along and cut down those groves, like they did in the books, but only immediately around the waygate, even though at this point nobody remembers what waygates are. Right. But then everyone meets up, and Perrin actually, I was wrong, he gets a line in this, and he says, at least I wasn't stupid enough to grab your dagger. That was worth waiting for. Now, and I don't know how Perrin knew about the dagger, because he never met Matt. This is the first time they've met, so unless people have told him about it in the background when it's off camera, then he shouldn't have actually known about the dagger at all. But that obviously had to be cut, because that would have actually involved Perrin speaking, and we can't have that. You get this scene between Egwene and Rand. Oh, there's just lovers meeting again. And I mean, she did dump him literally in the first episode. And so we should have just moved on by now. But apparently, no. He's just going back to her for absolutely no reason whatsoever. I don't know. Again, it was explained in the first books, but whenever you changed the story and made her dump him in the first one, well, now there's literally no reason he should give a damn about her at all. Especially not giving her looks like that. And then they just decide to send off their horses because they wouldn't survive the ways. And it's like, what? They survived the ways just fine in the books. And in fact, actually, there's a big deal about the horses in the books. Like, Lan's horse, Mandar, is literally almost like part of him. There's sort of a kind of a bond there. And Bella has literally never been mentioned at all. And all in all, the horses in this have just been treated like, yeah, we just ride them. We don't really care about them. And so we'll just send them off without even a second thought in this. It doesn't matter at all. Okay, Raf, fine. And then they line up in the Avengers and they just get ready to, in the last few minutes of the episode, dump all of the plot of the episode on you just randomly. I mean, we had plenty of time before to do all of this, but really, we just needed to have a load of relationship drama for absolutely no reason that didn't exist. And we had to get that in there, so we just didn't have time for any of the actual moving along of the actual plot, and so we just put it in the last few minutes, and we hope you actually stayed around to watch. And this is when Nynaeve just casually goes, oh yeah, we told the boys about what Siuan said. It's like, did you? Did you? Because all she said to you was that you and Egwene were the bestest ever people in the world eversies, and actually, all you're gonna have to do is just save the world magically, because all of the entire world rests on your 2 shoulders each. The boys were never mentioned. The boys, nobody cared about the boys. It was all about Nynaeve and Egwene and how they're the bestest people in the world. Don't you know, we've never had anyone as powerful as you. You're definitely the Dragon Reborn, despite the fact that one of you, it's literally impossible for you to be the Dragon Reborn. You probably are, because that's how we're writing it now, even though it's literally impossible and we said it was. But no, we're just casually telling the boys about it because, let's face it, they don't matter. It's not their show. That's why they don't say anything. That's why they barely even appear. And so we can just casually tell them in the background off screen that, yeah, actually, the Merlin just told us how amazing we are and how we're definitely the Dragon Reborn. So you should probably just leave. If you just leave, no one will care because it's definitely not any of you. And Rand's like, yeah, we've all heard about the ways. Everybody's heard about the ways. It's all into all the stories. But, what are they? So I'm like, hang on, you've all heard about the ways, but none of you know what they are, even though you've all heard about them in stories, right? What exactly were in these stories where you could literally keep hearing about them and being told about them, but not actually know anything about them? Because that's quite interesting storytelling. Did Rafe write those as well? Because those sound like one hell of a read. I mean, you have to remember that these ways are literally products of the Ogier from literally just after the time of the breaking, haven't been used in hundreds, if not over 1,000 years, and literally most people in the entire world have forgotten they even existed, and they've just been built over and destroyed, and so nobody uses them, nobody knows about them, and they've faded from memory of basically everyone except Moiraine and the Ogier. But apparently, Rand, who's only ever been in this little tiny town where no one has barely ever visited it for 2,000 years, he's heard all about them. Right. It's a good job, though, that he literally knows what they are and doesn't know what they are simultaneously, because that just gives the Ogier time to just announce it for everybody involved, like the audience. There really had to be a better way to do this, didn't there? But essentially, they're just fast travel ways. It kind of shrinks distances, so you travel further. As he says, one step in the ways is 100 miles in the real world. Except there's problems, and Moiraine really doesn't want him talking about those. But she says, we're using the ways because it's the fastest way to the Eye of the World. And like, well, what's the Eye of the World? It's just the Dark One is. I'm like, oh, okay, Swan said that earlier. She says, yeah, it's where the Dark One's prison is. It's where the boar is. You what? I mean, it isn't. It objectively isn't. The Dark One is encaged at the boar in Shaiol Gul, which is the mountain where all of the actual, basically, armies of the Dark One are. It's pretty much where the Trollocs are, where the Fades are, where everything about them actually exists. It's where the last battle will be. But now it's at the Eye of the World. You know, the thing that travels around the world, that can always be found by people that need it, but can't be. And, now the Dark One's there as well for some reason. Why did you get rid of Shaiol Gul? Why? Did you think it was too close to Lord of the Rings? Did you think that if we had a big bad guy that was literally at a mountain where all of the armies of the Dark One were, then people would just go, oh my god, the Wheel of Time, you've just stolen that from Lord of the Rings? Because the answer would have been, yes. Yes, he did. But there's nothing wrong with that. That's just what the plot was. But in this, oh no, now it's a major issue. Now we've got to completely change where the Dark One is, where he's located, just so that people don't draw comparison with another show, which also has a fantasy setting. And I'm like, why are you completely and utterly destroying everything about the books just because you're scared of a simple comparison, which, coincidentally, just happens to be true? Like, I could understand if this had some kind of legal ramification, like this was your own IP and you didn't want to get sued, but it's not your own IP, and this has existed for literally decades, and there's never been any lawsuits so far, so I don't know why there would be now. I mean, it's not as if the Wheel of Time property hasn't actually made a ton of money, so if anyone was going to cause any kind of uproar about this, it would have already been done. The change seems pointless and destructive. Because now you've not only destroyed Shaiol Ghul, you've also destroyed the Eye of the World. There was one nice bit in this, though, where she was like, yeah, it's where the last dragon trapped him at the cost of almost everything. So it's like, oh yeah, so now at least you're admitting that he imprisoned the Dark One, and although there was kind of disastrous consequences, he imprisoned the Dark One, and therefore, I don't know, saved the world. And it wasn't literally arrogance of men destroying the world like you claimed. No, it was actually him saving the world, thank you very much. So now we've actually got Moiraine, who actually knows history, like she should have always done, which is now giving a more reasonable interpretation of what she should have done. But instead, right at the very start of the first episode, they just had to crowbar that poison in there, just to, you know, scare off half their audience. And Rand's like, oh, so you're talking about the dragon. One of us is the dragon. Do you know who it is? And she's like, let me speak clearly. I couldn't tell you anything when I went to the Two Rivers, but we can't stop now. We've got to know forwards. And like, you didn't answer his question. And the only thing that anyone would ask in this situation is, who's the dragon? But Moiraine is really laying it on thick. And she's like, look, if we turn back now, the entire world will be destroyed. Trollocs and Fades in their millions will sweep across all of the earth. And they will burn everything, eat everybody, and nothing will be left. There will be a new age built upon the corpses of your families. And it's a very impressive speech. After that, I think it had convinced most people. And I say convinced most people because Egwene, I shouldn't give a damn about any of them. No, the apocalypse means nothing to Egwene. The people don't mean anything. Her family and the corpses and the deaths of literally everybody on Earth means nothing to Egwene because she turns around and goes, yeah, okay. If we turn back now, literally everybody dies. But what happens to me if I'm not the dragon? And I'm like, oh my God, you self-serving little cow. Come on. You've literally got told that the entire apocalypse rests on your shoulders twice. And the only thing you're concerned about is, if I'm not the dragon, will I die? You self-serving little bint. The entire point of being the dragon is that the dragon is sacrificial in nature. Part of being the dragon is that you sacrifice yourself for the world. Everybody is meant to sacrifice themselves for the world. That's what heroes do. But not in this. No, now in this, it's just me. Oh, what's anyone going to do about poor Egwene if she's not the dragon reborn? And then Moiraine's just like, oh, we can't know for certain, as if she's scared of telling her. When what she really just said is, grow up. You might have to look after someone else and worry about someone else other than yourself. But for now, let's go through the door and save the world and worry about the consequences afterwards, shall we? And be like, I've sacrificed 20 years of my life trying to save the world, and you can't even go for one little trip. Who on earth do you even think you are? And now get through those doors before I send you to the Mistress of Novices. That's the only reaction that actually was deserved. But apparently no. Now we've got to handle them with kids' gloves. And then Moiraine literally makes Loial and his entire scene completely redundant. Because she was like, we have a crisis and we have a solution. Meaning that we've got an Ogier here who can use the ways. Except he's not needed for the ways, because now Moiraine can just open them using the One Power, despite the fact that they're nothing to do with the One Power. They were grown by the Ogier. Yes, they were given to them as a gift via Aes Sedai. Fine. But they were grown by the Ogier. They were designed for the Ogier to use without the Aes Sedai there. So what is the point, and how on earth can the Ogier use them when the Ogier can't channel if you need the One Power to open them all? Were the Ogier supposed to have an Aes Sedai, I don't know, the rarest people on Earth around them whenever they just wanted to take a day trip down to the nearest city to build a wall? Literally none of this makes sense. There's a reason why in the books they were opened with a leaf that was put on the door so that anybody could use them. But apparently no, not this one. This one needs to be specifically opened by an Aes Sedai, which makes it completely redundant for Loial to even be there, as he's not needed to open them. And now maybe in the next episode they go, well, he's the one that navigates through them. Okay. But I still ask, what's the point of the ways if the Ogier couldn't travel without the aid of the Aes Sedai? What a terrible gift. It's like gifting someone a car and going, look, it's your car. But I'm going to be driving it, I'm going to be keeping it, and it's going to be at my house. And if you want to use it, you have to get permission from me to use it and come around to my house, and I will drive you everywhere. But it's definitely your car. But they go through, and you get this really dark image of it, which is literally about the best you can do. The entire ways are just meant to be pure darkness, so really visually in a TV show, it's never going to look that good. There isn't much they can do with it. But essentially, they all step through into the darkness and they're all really scared, and Rand has soy face until they realize that Matt hasn't followed them. And they're just screaming, Matt, follow us, the door's closing, the door's closing. I'm like, the door had to be closed, so if Moiraine hadn't deliberately closed it, doesn't close on its own, and like it's opened with the one power, so she could just open it again. Like, I don't know what the problem is meant to be here. So they're like screaming, and if it's going to close and he'll never be able to open it again, but that's not how the ways worked. It was literally two-way travel. It was literally the point of their entire existence. And Matt just stands there like a complete pleb. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why this is happening. Apparently it's just like, no, I'm not going to do it. I mean, Matt's only a hero that literally would sacrifice himself to save anybody. He's only one of the main characters in the show. But remember, this isn't Matt. I mean, he's got the same name as Matt, but it's not actually Matt. This is just some random fella, which is completely degenerate. He's a thief. He's evil. He's so evil that a dagger could feed off him. The most evil dagger in the world found enough evil inside Matt to feed off him. And so even without the dagger, he's just out there being pure evil on his own, and he's not going to go off. He might die. Of course he might die. He's not going to sacrifice himself. It's not like he's a hero or anything. What have you done to this show? And that's where it ends. And I told you in the last review, this can always get worse. Because I have to admit, this show wasn't boring. This episode wasn't boring. It's not like we had with episode 4, where I'm literally just looking at it going, oh my god, is this ever going to end? I was very busy during this episode because I just had to write down so many... I wrote down more notes for this show than even the previous episode. I was very busy and had to keep pausing it all the time just because they got so much wrong and destroyed so many things that I couldn't keep up. And I don't think I have to say much. I don't think I even need to summarize it all because, quite frankly, this episode speaks for itself, and what they did speaks for itself. And I think anyone that didn't read the books, if you actually watch this, I don't know whether you'll spot all of the inconsistencies and how none of it really makes sense. But I think there's going to be a lot of people out there which is just like, this is awful. Like, this is really bad. Like, the writing is really bad. It even contradicts itself in 2 sentences right next to each other. And you don't need to know the books to understand things like that. And I don't think anybody would care. And I think a lot of stuff will just turn off the readers. And I think that's probably why the Wheel of Time is just not doing the numbers that were expected. That's the idea. Its success lies elsewhere. You see, this show's on Amazon Prime. It's based off a subscription model, and most people get Amazon Prime for the shopping and the free delivery anyway. It's not like we actually need viewers on our TV show when we're on Amazon Prime. Hell, they renewed season 2 before anyone had even seen or filmed an episode. That is how amazing that they are. They don't need viewers. They can change whatever they want, produce any crap that they want. At least that's what they think. I mean, Cowboy Bebop literally just got cancelled after season 1 because nobody watched it because it was trash. It was nothing like the actual anime. Even though I haven't watched it, I've heard so many people rant about it, and this is basically the same thing with the same problem. Except Netflix still needs to make a profit, and Amazon, they kind of don't. Amazon Prime Video is literally just an added bonus. I don't think it's what most people subscribe for. If you don't buy stuff from Amazon, you're probably not subscribed to Amazon Prime Video anyway. And so it allows them to put things forward, which it doesn't really matter what the source material is. It doesn't matter if they change it or how many fans they lose. Because all they're going to do is get the same money anyway. And for the few people that actually watch it, all they get to see is how amazing Rafe is. And he's such a good person with all of the right beliefs. Rafe is on the right side of history. Don't you know? And that's important, because that means he's a good moral human being who actually isn't destructive at all. So yes, the Wheel of Time might not be doing the numbers that expected, but it's achieving Raf's intended goal. I can only imagine that Rafe must have been distraught when Tumblr was taken down, but now he's got a new outlet for his creativity to really show the world what he thinks that people should be like. And the world in Raf's vision should be 52-year-old women going at it like bunny rabbits. So I hope you enjoyed this journey with me through the teenage high school romance drama that this show has morphed into, where we care more about who's getting into each other's pants than anything else. But I do know one thing. If you actually want the heroes of the story to be the heroes of the story, then they're probably going to actually need to exist on the screen at some point. And, God forbid, you might actually have to write them a few lines. because this has now been 2 episodes where everyone that matters has barely been on the screen. And I'm not sure how long you can make that continue unless you actually change the single most important moment of the entire series. And let's face it, after everything they've shown so far, I think that's on the cards. I'm not saying it's going to happen. Quite frankly, I honestly don't see how they could do it, but I didn't see how they could do anything else at all. So I think the possibility is definitely open. And at this point, if they do it, quite frankly, the only thing I'm going to do is laugh. Because I have long given up any kind of attachment to this series or attaching it to even the Wheel of Time. I mean, the only attachment I have to this, to the original IP, is I just consider this just like a long fan video that someone stuck on Reddit. Like, I don't care whether it's actually anything to do with the original plot anymore. I'm just gonna find it funny. So go on, Rafe. Do your worst, because quite frankly, if you manage to do worse than the job you've already done, I will be genuinely impressed. But for now, that's it from me. If you liked the video, press like and subscribe. More videos in the future, and let me know what you thought of Wheel of Time Episode 6 and the rest of this horrible tragedy down below. But for now, that's it from me. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.